and we're back for another episode. Today I'm joined by Professor Quentin. I'm not really French. Michaudel, hopefully Michaudel.
Michaudel.
Michaudel. Quentin Michaudel. That's actually a really cool last name. That if you say he's the
Thank you.
French
You didn't
accent.
choose it, but
Yeah. Well, that's fair. But perhaps maybe by my mispronunciation of the French, maybe some people will pick up on. He actually is from France. Grew up in La Rochelle, France, which for those who don't know is about on the southwest, right in between, I think, Bordeaux and Bordeaux. Oh man, what's the other
and
one?
Nantes.
Nantes. Yeah, that's the
Nantes.
big one. Yeah. Right smack dab in the middle. I believe it's like a. I don't know if it's not really. It's on the west coast. It's not really a beach city, but it's more like a harbor, I think. So how was Hopefully that was a good description of your hometown. I don't know if
Yeah, it's a historical harbor, one of the oldest, not oldest, but one of the very touristy area on the west shore of France. There's a lot of things to see, and it's not a beach city per se, but we have four islands that are nearby. So there's a lot of beaches that you can enjoy in that part of France.
yeah. So generally, generally, I think you're actually my first guest from that grew up in France. So how was your general growing up in France? Like how and like being here in America, here in Texas, anything you kind of noticed some differences?
Well, it's quite
It's quite
different. I'd
different.
say growing up in France is quite different from growing up in the US, and maybe especially with growing up in Texas. But uh, I mean, besides that, it's pretty I would say uneventful childhood. I was
Yeah,
fortunate to live in a nice part of the country and really much enjoy my time in La Rochelle, and I would recommend people visiting France to actually try that. I think that part of France
sure.
is often under visited by American people. That journey goes to Paris and then Nice on the other side, but the West Coast has a lot to offer between the food, the culture, and the landscape and the beaches and whatnot. So, but yeah,
Yeah,
pretty, I would say different in many regards, but not
yeah,
as
yeah,
different as if I was from another country.
yeah. I was gonna say because I mean, like you mentioned, a lot of Americans that go to France, I mean, they really they visit Paris and a lot of things on the East Coast, probably because it's easy to like get to the other countries, right? You can get right to Switzerland, Belgium, and Italy. So I imagine like Paris is a big one. Things like Marseille and Monaco are huge, like obviously touristy towns. But I, my impression is that the West Coast just isn't as. I mean, it's not as touristy as the other ones. So I think cities like Bordeaux and Nantes are obviously huge cities. So um, in general,
Yeah,
I
it's
mean,
it's touristy for Europe for
uh,
Europeans, but
yeah,
yeah, I think Americans like to have the opportunity to maybe travel around
yeah,
different country in Europe, like the typical 2 weeks trip where they will visit 5 countries. And so in this case, it's for sure that if you come to the West Coast, you're further away, except from Spain, which is not that far from my hometown,
hmm
especially in Texan distances.
yeah, right. It's funny when because I'm from Philadelphia, and so when I moved down here, they were like, "Oh yeah, well, it's like to them like a 6 hour drive in Texas is like a short distance, if that makes sense. Like it's like doesn't, and it's like, what do you mean 6 hours is like?" And what's crazy about Texas is how big it is. Like I didn't realize it would take like 16 hours to get from like the east side of Texas all the way to the west side. Like it's ginormous. Um,
Yep.
but one last thing I wanted to kind of ask about is like general, let's say visitation. Like, do you have any recommendations on, let's say, underrated places to visit over in France, or at least things to do? Because obviously, like we said, Paris. I'm sure is that everyone knows about Paris. That's nothing special, but like maybe West Coast things. Um,
Yeah, I mean, of course, I say like my La Rochelle is a very beautiful town, and it's
mm,
there's a lot to see from a historical standpoint. There's a lot of very beautiful area. We have the biggest marina, so
mm,
for people liking to sail, that's a great place. We have also one of the biggest, if not the biggest, aquarium from in Europe. So a lot of things to see there, and then you can drive south and Now you have South, you have Bordeaux, which obviously is very famous for also its historical culture, but also wine. And then if you go from Bordeaux, you can go drive east from Bordeaux. You can go through this along the river called the Dordogne River. And it's
Hmm.
the Dordogne Valley is one of the most beautiful part of France. And I think very underrated for American because it's maybe not as commonly visited again as Nice or other the Provence part of France. But the Dordogne Valley has beautiful like medieval castles. There's um, like caves from the Neanderthal and all the
Hmm.
uh, so like and some wonders like natural wonders is this the giant hole. It's called the Padirac hole, and it's just like gigantic. You have to go down like I can't remember how deep it is, but it's crazy. And then you have stalactite and stalagmites, and so and the food is amazing. It's
Right.
really famous for duck food. So everything there is cooked in duck fat, and it's where foie gras is originating from. So
Yeah.
obviously, if you're opposed to this kind of food, that's not ideal. But for those that are not vegetarian and don't have problem eating duck, this is a really famous part of France for that.
That's interesting. I would have never guessed like duck is like a commodity there. That's really
Oh, it
interesting.
is. I think they
In
even opened a
general, is it, or
fast
is
food
this kind
somewhere
of
that
West
it
Coast?
was.
Like in general,
Sorry.
like duck, or is it more of like a West Coast kind of Bordeaux thing?
So duck is common in France. It's like way easier to find duck in France than it is in the US. But
Wow,
the really the heart of the duck region is the southwest of France.
interesting. Okay, I'll keep that in mind. Yeah, I mean, if you're ever in France, definitely give the West Coast Bordeaux, La Rochelle. I didn't pronounce that right, but you know,
No, you did a
give
great job. Great job.
give
La Rochelle
give
is good.
the West Coast of France a shot. Now, so but after, well, you did your undergrad, and your master's degree at. See, I'm gonna butcher this again, but here we go. Ecole Normale Supérieure de Lyon. But the long and short there is that it's a university in Lyon, and
Yeah, no,
you know,
you,
but before, let's say before going there a little bit, were you always interested in STEM fields? Like, is that kind of something you were always interested in?
yeah, I have a pretty boring, I guess, uh, story coming to science story. I always loved science, and so I was fortunate to grow up in a family where higher education was something that was accessible and something that was encouraged from my parents. So I love science from an early age, and so I had decided to be a scientist very early on, and so I just followed the path that I thought would take me there. And so yeah, the French system is different, very different in terms of education. So I actually started my undergrad in Versailles,
Mm,
where the castle is. And,
yep.
and and because we have a system of prep school where we have to do 2 years or 3 years and prepare for like entry exam that are like national exam. And then when you take those exams, you can go to the next school. And then for me, that was Lyon. And so I spent another 3 years in Lyon. But actually, out of the 3 years, I spent two times 6 months in the US. So it was that's how I started my time in the US.
Yeah, I saw. Yeah, because I saw you done. I mean, you spent 6 months with Professor Phil Baran at Scripps, which is honestly quite a long time for an internship. So, how did you get that opportunity to go work with Professor Phil Baran? How did that all like transpire?
Yeah, it was pretty random at first. I so the French system really encourage you to when you're in science to go do an internship in another country. Actually, in a lot of fields, but for us, it was really part of the deal that at some point during our master, we will or bachelor, we will go to do a certain amount of months in a foreign country, and the goal with that is experience I think other culture, but also improve your English. Hard to say, but my English was worse a few years ago at that time. And so for me, it was always I really wanted to go to the US because I wanted to
Yeah.
do like some research and I wanted to do it. I wanted to see what was doing research in the US in one of those really big labs because the French system for research is very different. So I just wanted to kind of have a sense of both before I applied for PhDs and whatnot. And so I wanted to do total synthesis. That was really at the time what I loved to do in chemistry. That was really my my favorite by far part of chemistry, and even part of organic chemistry. And so Phil Baran was at the time really already getting to be very famous, maybe not quite as much as he is now, but I was just admiring the work of people that at that time I didn't know, but now I know quite well, and the whole
Sure.
synthesis that worked on. And so I just emailed him out of the blue and I say, can I come and work in your lab? And so normally a typical internship would have been 3 months, but since I had the opportunity to go there, I asked if I could do 6 months, and so that was allowed. And so yeah, and Phil, I had a fellowship, so Phil took me in, and that's how I got my foot through the door, and that's why I'm still in the U.S. 13 years later.
That's really cool. I mean, yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting that France, your education system does that. If I understand that correctly, like they actually really encourage you to go study outside of France, like internships. That's really interesting because
Hmm.
I mean, here in the United States, that's definitely not. It's not like it's not unheard of to go do that, but I wouldn't say it's part of our curriculum to like push students out. They want to keep them here. That's really interesting that
I mean,
they did that.
yeah, I think it's, I mean, one of the many very big differences between France and the US, or I would say between any European country and the US. But I think it's also, scale-wise, right? France is about the
That's true.
size. Three France is two Texas. So France is actually not even a smaller country in Europe. But nonetheless, it's like if you grew up in one state in the US, and so we're pushing you to go to see all the states. So I think
Yeah,
American, it would be interesting for, I do think Americans should travel a bit more abroad. But that being said, I also do understand that because of the size, the sheer size of the country, it's just like when you're
yeah.
going from California to the East Coast, that's like if I was going to Moscow
Hmm.
from Paris. So it's huge, right? It's a
Yeah, it's a huge difference. Yeah, yeah. There are. I was talking to my buddies. Like, there really are. I definitely want to travel abroad, but then it's like, traveling. Obviously, I'm a grad student. You know how it is. Sometimes I can't travel abroad right now. But there's so much to see in the United States. It's like I can't like. It's like, there's so much to see here. But I digress. What I'm curious about is, what was about total synthesis that kind of really brought you to it? How did you like initially get started with that? Um, And what were your first impressions moving over to the United States in general and moving over to, moving to California? I'm sure that was a like, I wouldn't say culture shock's the right word, but like it's just it's got to be super different when you first got here.
Yeah, no, it was definitely a culture shock. I would say, I guess it's a multi-layered question. So first, why called synthesis? I just really love synthesis. I thought that being a sort of a molecular architect was like the coolest thing that you could do. I really like just the idea of building up complexity from starting, with simple building blocks, and just being able just through like first the mental exercise to design synthetic routes, and then implement them into real life, and get new product. And just every time I one of my students make a new, a product that no one has ever synthesized or never ever reported, at least in the literature, it's just always exciting for me. So I think that's just making new stuff has always been the most exciting part of my job.
Mm.
And I really like to play chess, and so chess for me, it's solving a chess problem is a bit like solving a whole synthesis. It's like you start from where you want to go, and you try to go back and figure out how the best way to get there. So I don't know, I feel like that's always been how my brain likes to work. And so I always enjoyed it. I don't really do it anymore, but I still pretty much follow the total synthesis literature, and I just now do different. My group does different type of synthesis, but really we're at core a synthetic group. Now, when I moved to California, it was quite of a interesting experience. It was obviously very different. Like the San Diego is a very much of a driving around city. The public
Yeah.
transportation, I think, has improved a little bit, but it's not quite the same as what we are used to in Europe. So I had to own my first car in San Diego. I had the driver license, so I never owned a car in France. And then I had to get used to this giant, lab that the Baran lab was. At the time, it was smaller than now, but it's still. I think when I started, I would say it was probably around 25 people, and I
Wow.
came in a lab that I had done one research already experience in France, and it was a lab of maybe 2 or 3 people. I mean, in France it's a bit different. So even if you add all the teams together, it was still pretty much probably the same as just the Baran lab itself. And I was used to be in a space where in a bay that had a lot of room for everyone. But then I remember my first day in the band lab, I walk around and it was just like jungle, like it was chaos, like it was so many people, there was so many things happening, so many, and I was there and I was very I impressed, and I was like also everybody. I was jet lagged. I had just flown in the day before. I landed on Sunday. On Monday morning I was at Scripps, and so I was like a bit out of it to the beginning, and everybody was speaking English very fast, very and so yeah, it was first week I was like, wow, this is crazy, and then I got used to it and I loved it, and I came back for my PhD. So
Yeah, I forgot Scripps is actually in San Diego, not L.A. So in San Diego is quite it's actually it's quite a nice city, San Diego. Like San Diego is very like you get all the benefits of California without like the homelessness issue in L.A. So I'm sure there's homeless
I would
in
say
San Diego
mostly
too.
you don't get the traffic issue as
Yeah,
much as
traffic.
like
Yeah,
that would be my like I mean you do get some, but it's a bit more you know when it is, you know what direction it is, and so you
yeah,
can
yeah.
avoid it if you're smart about your commute. And so I mean Scripps is in La Jolla, which is just the north part of San
Hmm.
Diego, just outside I guess of San Diego proper. But it's beautiful. It's where very wealthy people live, and it's the golf course of like North Torrey Pines, which is on the PGA Tour, is right outside of Scripps. So from the window, at some point, we used to see Tiger Woods play, and
Oh
and
wow.
then past the golf course, it's the ocean. So it's a beautiful site. I didn't get to go to the beach very often when I was there, but I definitely admire the view and the sunset many 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 times.
Sure. Now, when you're in Professor Baran's lab, you really kind of focus on CH functionalization, and really their applications in complex molecules and like natural products. So during your time there, what were what were you working on specifically? And
Yeah, so my experience in the Baran was very strange in the I guess the output of my work. It was maybe
mm,
when I say strange, I mean more unusual. I was kind of at a transition time where we started to do more collaboration with industry at the time. So part of my work was applying our CH functionalization methods to complex scaffold that had some bioactivity. So we had a project with Bristol-Myers Squibb where they had an interesting molecule that was potentially an anti-HIV that had a high bioactivity sorry, yeah, high bioactivity, high anti-HIV activity, but it was very poorly soluble with this big terpene, and very poorly soluble in water because very greasy. And so if you want to, for to make a drug that is practical, most people don't want intravenous shots if they can avoid it. So
mm,
oral delivery is preferred in general. So the idea was, can we increase the polarity of the molecule, make it more soluble in water, and but when you do that, and so you can functionalize a complex scaffold using CH functionalization, then every modification you make potentially is going to kill the activity. So it's
yeah,
all a trade-off of finding the right spot to modify your molecules to make it to give it better physical chemical properties, but at the same time keeping the bioactivity intact
yep.
and not increasing the toxicity. So that was part of my work. I actually started at a time where we were very interested in this synthesis of terpenes through that two-phase approach. So it's called the cyclase phase and the oxidase phase. And the idea was you can make a skeleton of the molecule that has almost no oxygen or nitrogens, mostly carbons and hydrogen, and then you can build up all the oxygen to synthesize a lot of compound from the same family. And so Taxol, I think, is the best example
Hmm.
of this approach. But that's how I got started. My natural product was different. It was an alkaloids that we were trying to synthesize, and I had to develop a CH amination reaction. So I had to introduce a nitrogen where hydrogen was in the molecule, that had no other groups to easily direct this transformation. It was an unactivated CH bond, so pretty hard to functionalize. And so I tried a lot of things, and I actually developed a whole new CH lamination reaction that unfortunately worked great on this molecule that we had to functionalize, but not at the right position. So that kind of was a dead end for the toll synthesis aspect. But that's how I got my first I guess paper, my first approach, my first method that was developed. And the last thing I've done was also very. Sorry, you were
no,
asking.
go. No, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say my last project was very also different from all of this. So far it's just a lot of methods development. I worked on probably 3 different type of methods during my PhD. But the last one, I had a very great collaboration with a group at Scripps Oceanography, which is not the same Scripps as Scripps Research where I was. It's very close by though. It's like down the road from us. And so I worked with Brad Moore, and Brad has a group in natural product isolation, and also biocatalysis, and trying to understand how enzyme synthesize natural product. And so they had this very cool, very unique enzyme that they call the Favorsky's enzyme, because it was catalyzing a type of Favorsky type rearrangement, which is a very strange reaction in the book of organic chemists, and even stranger that an enzyme can do it. And so the problem of that enzyme is that it takes the substrate that is not a natural it's not a substrate that is easily isolable. It's a substrate that is already transformed by, I can't remember, but 4 or 5 enzymes before. So the idea was, can we try to synthesize what we think is the substrate of this molecule, so that we can study just the mechanism of this enzyme? And so they asked me to do that. Long story short, it was hard to exactly synthesize a substrate. We were able to synthesize some mimics, and then we did a lot of studies, and it was like 4 different groups involved in this collaboration that led to a really a big paper. But that was really nice for me to start learning about how to work with people that were not organic chemists by training, or not synthetic organic chemists by training, and so really learning how merging different fields of science can lead to bigger discovery. So that was very, very cool.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I feel like one of the benefits of working in kind of total synthesis and really on the front end of synthetic organic chemistry is like you really learn so many techniques, and I feel like you really are you learn how to manage your let's say starting materials, but also just like kind of like load management. So generally speaking, during your time there, I don't know if you can speak on like some let's say little techniques or strategies that kind of worked for you, that you would kind of recommend to, let's say, new graduate students within the synthetic chemistry area?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, so I mean, I think how you put it well. The nice thing about doing total synthesis is that you learn to use pretty much any type of reaction. I don't think there is one type of major type of organic reaction that I have not tried during my time in the Baran lab. I mean, we talk about oxidation reaction, reduction reaction, cross-coupling reaction, radical and cationic type cyclization, Diels-Alder reaction, pericyclic reaction. I mean, at some point I have tried one of them. Maybe the only one that I didn't try at the time was olefin metathesis, which is interesting because that's what half of my course is doing now.
Yeah, right.
but yeah, so you learn a lot of things, and so I think you're not an expert in any specific sub area of organic chemistry, but you know how to troubleshoot any type of reaction. So my advice for people, and when they're trying to develop reaction, is first do not cut corners at the first time you set up a reaction, and just ask yourself, is this reaction very sensitive or potentially sensitive to, let's say, water and oxygen? And if it is, go above and beyond to remove those parameters in the first time. And then once you get the reaction to work, you can always come back and try it, see if having those two, either oxygen or water, affect your reaction. If it doesn't, then you're fine, and you can do it, open flask, like Phil like to say. But otherwise, you might just miss a reaction that can be more sensitive. The other thing is, I would say, the most underappreciated, the most underrated tool of an organic chemist, and that was something that Phil really hammered into us, is TLC. Too often, students do not run TLCs when they follow a reaction, especially if it's a prep that they're following, and they assume that it's going to work exactly the same as in the paper. And most of the time it won't. And so sometimes you just save yourself a lot of trouble by just taking a simple TLC and following the reaction and see that the reaction is not quite done yet, or the reaction has not, gone anywhere, or the reaction has led to a myriad of compounds, and you probably could save some time not trying to go and purify all those, etc., etc. Like, you can learn so much. I mean, you can tell if the reaction has, if you run a new reaction and you know that, you can guess that your product is going to be more polymers than the starting materials, you can tell right away if this reaction has had a chance to work, or if it's likely not what you want that took place.
Yeah, that's definitely great advice. That's great advice. I could already tell, like, new students to the lab won't do that. They won't take the whatever, like 5 minutes just to like spot it, and then just run it on a little column, and just really just kind of see what's in there,
You should, and you should do it very early on. Like, you should set up your reaction, pretty much take a TLC right there, then tell TLC in 5 minutes. Like when you're trying a new reaction, like when it's something brand new, and then when you get used to, the reaction, then you can save time the next time around. But when we were doing scale up, like to just go to the frontline material, and it was steps that I have run before, I could just do by TLC and check that the product was there, and I didn't have to take an NMR of the crude reaction mixture, which is what I was gonna otherwise recommend. If you do a new reaction, you always want to take an NMR of the crude mixture before you start the purification, because sometimes you make the right compound. That happened to me. You can make the right compound during the reaction can work, but then the compound might be unstable on the silica gel, and so you might, if you just go directly to the column stage, you might miss out on, you might think the reaction doesn't work, and the reaction works, but the product is just unstable. So, just take time to do it, to make sure that every step along the way is working, and doing things on small scale also help you, because you can save a lot of time on the workup, the purification. So we were pretty quite adept of pipette columns or prep TLC, or all those methods to purify small amount.
Yeah.
Part of the group was working on terpenes, like myself, so we could do any type of column in prep TLC, but we could not use the LCMS, because our LCMS mostly work for nitrogenated compounds. So on the other hand, people working on alkaloid synthesis could use the LCMS all the time, but they could often not purify anything on normal phase TLC or normal phase silica gel, because it was too polar. So each project has its advantages and disadvantages.
Sure. So after you and your PhD with Professor Phil Baran, you moved to a postdoc with Professor Brett Fors at Cornell. Now, was it at this point that you really were considering like becoming a professor, or like when did that kind of idea start popping into your mind?
I don't know, probably when I was like 12 years old,
really?
So it's been a long time that I wanted to be a professor. But that being said, I didn't really know what a professor was doing. I just thought I wanted to be a scientist, I guess, growing up, and I liked all types of science when I was growing up until maybe high school. At the end of high school, I was like, biology, geology is not really my thing. And then I was like, after the end of my bachelor, I was like, physics and math, I like it, but it's not really my thing. And chemistry really at that point I crystallized as the thing that I wanted to do, and mostly organic chemistry. So it was more like finding what I wanted to do science, on what I wanted to research, than really what job I wanted to do. And so that's kind of maybe strange compared to other people, but I knew all the way that I wanted to do. So I did a postdoc because I wanted to go to academia. And so working with Brett, at the time, the choice was mostly that I knew that total synthesis is a challenging field nowadays to find funding for, and it's it's a very difficult. It's not something you can do everywhere. So I thought that it would be nice to branch out a little bit and use my synthetic skills to do something else. And I thought it would be a great opportunity, maybe my last opportunity, to really learn a new field. And so at the time, Brett was starting his lab at Cornell, and he was doing some polymer science. And Brett is actually also he's similar to my path. He was an organic chemist by training, that then turned and become more of a polymer scientist. And so I was like, that's going to be a perfect lab for me to learn something new, but also capitalize on my skills and my knowledge, so that I postdoc is good, but you don't have 5 years to relearn something new like you had
Yeah.
in your PhD, or you're trying not to stay for 5 years in your postdoc because you want to go in the job market before that. So I thought that was a great opportunity, and Brett, that I had, I knew a lot of great things about him from friends that had overlapped with him at different places or knew him, and he was highly recommended also from my advisor from Phil and other mentors that I had Scripps. But also, like, he was just starting at the time. So when I started my postdoc, Brett was starting his second year of his independent career. And so I was like, oh, that's going to be a perfect for me to see like the behind the scene of starting up a new lab, so that when I start my lab, because it's very different. The first thing you realize when you start your own lab, if you haven't had something like me, an experience like mine, where I worked with a young assistant professor, if you only worked with very big labs like the Baran lab, like it is night and day when you start. Like you're used to have everything there. You all the
Yeah.
chemicals, all the instruments, all the manpower, and the amazingly smart scientists around you, and suddenly you're like on your own and you have to build up from scratch, right? And so that was extremely useful for me to start to do a postdoc with Brett in that regard as well.
That's a really great point. I'm sure it was a really cool experience too. Like, because that's exactly what you wanted to do, right? Is become a professor, and he was second year in. So it was like, yeah, I mean, you got to see hands on, like, behind closed doors, like what it was really like. And I'm sure you learned based on that experience. I'm sure you took over that when you began at Texas A&M. Just real quick though, on your work there. So you were working on like photocatalytic systems to do, well, yeah, photocatalytic systems to make real well-defined polymer architectures, right? Using light. So I don't know if you can speak on that a little bit about what you were doing there.
Yeah, so sometimes I think people ask me why I switched to polymers, and again, I think for me, polymer is not it's not different from organic chemistry. Really, it's the same reaction. It's the same electrons that moves and make bonds and break bonds. So I think if you're a good organic chemist, you can easily transition to polymer science. Then there's a lot of things to learn about polymer physics, and I'm still very much learning those as I go in my independent career. And a lot of
Mm.
the applications are going to be, requiring you to know all the knowledge and just synthesis. But what I love about polymer science is that you can, from an organic synthetic chemist standpoint, is that you can use reaction in a way that is very different from organic chemistry. And so the way that what we were doing with Brett when I was with him, and he's still his lab very much still work in this area, is to try to control polymerization with external stimuli. And so you mentioned photocatalysis, so that's what we were doing. But after I left, they showed that you can also do it with electrochemistry, or you can do it with the addition of external reagents. But the idea is that if you have an external stimulus, then you can potentially stop a polymerization, and then you can restart it. And so
Hmm.
if you do that in organic reaction, like a typical organic synthesis, I mean, that would be crazy, right? Well, there would be no points that I can think of where you would want to do a reaction, stop it halfway, and then say, okay, now I'm going to restart it, right? That seems pretty silly. When you do organic synthesis on small molecules, you typically want to have the highest yield and the highest selectivity. But for polymers, it makes sense, right? Because now if you think about having two different stimuli, then you can potentially have two polymerization processes that will take place orthogonally in your pod, and then you
Mm.
can decide when you're doing one and when you're doing the other one, and so you can make some very interesting polymer architecture that have blocks or that have alternating motifs that you can actually perfectly tune in using those two stimuli. So let's say light and electrochemistry, or light and sonication, or light and some other reagent that you use. And so that's kind of the beauty of, in my opinion, of polymer science, is you can think about process that that utilize organic reaction in a way that is very different, and you can there's challenges that are just non-existent in small molecule synthesis that are fascinating to work on in polymer science.
Mm.
Like my group now, we're working on olefin metathesis, for example, among other things. But one thing we try to do is control the stereochemistry of double bonds in polymers. And if you do small molecule synthesis, you will try to get either 99% of the Z or cis compound, or you will try to get 99% of the E or trans compound, because generally you only want one. And if you get 75%, that's fine because you can sometime run a purification and separate the two. But in polymer, you will start, if you have some selectivity that is not 100%, then you'll just start accumulating defect in your structure. So if you really want a 99% pure, you need to find a method that's going to give you like 19, every step is going to be perfect because you won't be able to separate the defect from the polymer structure. But the other thing that is different is that potentially sometimes, so if you make a materials, we have, for example, like polyisoprene is a common polymers. If it's only trans double bond, that's going to be a very hard, very brittle material. But if you make the cis polyisoprene, that's your rubber. And so that's, what gloves in the lab used to be made of. And so that's just a change in the geometry of those double bonds. And if you're anywhere in between, then you can go anywhere from this very flexible, very soft material to this very hard and brittle material. So it is actually interesting for a polymer chemist to be able to target ratios that are not 99%, one way. And so again, that's just like there's a few cases in organic synthesis for small molecules where you would want to get a 55% cis or a 25% cis double bonds. But for polymers, that can be very useful. So that's what I like about it. It says it just opened the doors to think about new problems that just would not exist in traditional organic synthesis.
Yes, I would say this kind of brings us nicely then, I guess, into your research now, because that's literally what you're doing then. Before we get there, real quick, you're now you're at A&M, but had you applied anywhere else, or were you looking to come to A&M? Like, what kind of brought you to Texas A&M?
I think like most people, if not all people, trying to get a job in academia this day, I applied to a lot of positions. I think I applied to over 40 positions, and then you go through the hiring process, you go to the interviews, and then you see what offers you have, and A&M was the best offer for me, so I just came here. I was very fortunate to start at A&M because first it's a great program, great department, and just, I have great colleagues, but more specifically, I have a lot of people interested in polymer science in the chemistry department. So that was, it's not the case in all departments. It's departments that don't have such a center of mass in polymer science. So that was great for me to start. And more than that, like A&M is a huge school, and there's a lot of polymer scientists in all the departments. So in engineering, for example, material science engineering, mechanical engineering, chemical engineering, and so on and so forth. And so that means that I have a lot of collaborators. I have a lot of people that I can, ask advice from in terms of how to apply our polymers that we make for specific goals. And we have the best, we have amazing facilities for soft materials characterization. And so I didn't have to buy many instruments when I started. So all in all, that was a really great spot for me to land in. Very fortunate.
Yeah, it is. Like you mentioned, Texas A&M, great polymer science there. So you have all the instruments and resources are there for you. Like definitely for a startup lab. So it's definitely very very good that it happened that way. But into your research now, so it's kind of like I guess a couple of areas really. And as we mentioned, so one is really trying to make stereoselective olefin metathesis polymers, and the invention of Sufex click chemistry. And so we can start with definitely with the stereoselective olefin metathesis, because I think it's obviously we were just talking about that, but one of the questions I have is, why is it more because of the novelty of like the polymer structure itself has not necessarily been done, or is it more of like is there actually like let's say applications of being able to control the polymer structure, if that makes sense?
So it's kind of a bit of both. It started as we were targeting some polymer structures, and we're still targeting those structures that no one has made before, and so that kind of made us think through in a very total synthesis approach. We thought at it, through a retrosynthesis approach, and we're like, if we want to make this very complex construct, that it would be nice to have this type of methods. to get there. And so we've done the first part of the job. We developed those methods, and now we have to finish those complex molecules. But that really led us to have a better appreciation of the where the field was in terms of stereoselectivity and stereocontrol in polymer science, specifically in the area of double bonds. But we also interested in what we call tacticity, which is the stereochemistry of sp3 centers, so of tetrahedral carbons and whatnot in polymers. And the truth is, it's that it's a field that has existed for a long time. There's been a lot of great contribution by a lot of giants in the field. But it was a review published not too long ago by Dobb and Becker in 2019 in one of the Nature journal that just highlights the fact that we still very poorly understand how tacticity and how stereochemistry in general affects polymer properties. It's very hard to predict that this specific geometry, this specific 3D orientation of the polymers will have this influence on thermal properties, on mechanical properties, on the conjugation for conjugated materials, on electronic and optical properties, and so on and so forth. And so the reason why that's still very challenging is because there's not too many methods out there that allow you to perfectly control stereochemistry in polymers. And so we thought that, that became for us a very much of a challenge, is that can we find practical methods that will allow us to synthesize a lot of polymers very easily and in a very practical way with perfect control of the geometry. And again, like with this idea that we would not only target only one out of the two options, like either the cis or the trans, but we would try to find methods that allow people to tune this ratio, for example, of cis and trans, but it could be a ratio of RNS carbons, and so tacticities in a different type of polymers. And so now we're getting pretty good at it. We have some very, I think, good methods to do that, but there's still a lot of challenges. For example, now we can modify those ratios, but we think that there's still a pretty random placement of those double bonds in the backbone. So can we find now methods to actually dictate exactly where we place every, double bond? So we have some ideas to do that. So there's still a lot of things we want to do, but then that allow us to see, okay, this family of polymers, this polycarbonates, or those polyesters, or whatever polymers we make, is gonna have more crystallinity or more amorphous type behavior depending on how much double bonds that are cis in the backbone we can put in, or how much trans. So that really, it's a question of how we can tune physical properties based on stereo control of the structure.
Yeah, so just on these cis-selective acyclic diene metathesis polymerizations, how does it work? It's kind of dive into that a little bit, because I'm sure people in the audience will want to know how it works. So you take an alpha omega diene and you're able to make a polymer that is all cis. And I guess one question I have is, I don't understand, how does that look in 3 dimensions? Is it kind of like a spiral then? I don't really understand how that.
Yeah, so it depends. So I would say the first type of polymers we made in this area that are conjugated, the polyphenylene, the PPVs, they will have some sort of a bit of a helical type structure. But now if you have like a backbone that is flexible in between every double bond, there's so many conformation that those single bond can take, that I don't think that's going to really have a helical type structure, except if you have any groups that can maybe induce that through weak interactions. But those polymers will be typically coil in a way that most polymers are like this like cooked noodle, and that's how the properties of polymers come from, right? It's because of this entanglement of chain. So now it's a very good question overall. We don't really know if we definitely see changes in physical properties, but we don't have a very good understanding of how we go from the drawing of the structure to the properties. Like how do this noodles change in the bowl exactly, and how their entanglement change, and all of this is an open question for us for sure.
Okay. But how does 'cause I'm not really a polymer chemist, honestly, so I don't really understand. I mean, I understand. Well, I take that back. I understand like alkene metathesis, but maybe just talk about how your process works. Like how you're able to make
Yeah,
these
so
dynes.
the first so what we just started with ROM. So ROM is ring opening metathesis polymerization, and in this case, your catalyst, your initiator will come react with one of the monomers and then open that monomers, and that opening of the monomer really allows you to release a lot of energy, and that's that release of energy is what drives this type of polymerization. And so then now your catalyst is bound to this open monomer and can react with another closed monomer and so on and so forth. So that's what we call a chain propagation type mechanism. And if you do it well, you can have a controlled chain propagation where every chain grows at the same rate. So that's
Mm.
great because that allows you a lot of control. So you can actually dictate how big your polymers are by just choosing well how much initiator you add compared to the amount of monomer, because every initiator is going to start one chain. Now, the challenge here is that your monomers have to be very strained. And so that means that typically that's going to take you several steps to synthesize those monomers. They're not necessarily the easiest to functionalize or like to diversify, I should say, most of them. And so we thought that it would be nice to use a different process. And this process, you mentioned it, is called ADMET for acyclic diene metathesis. And to see if we could implement the same stereoselectivity that we had in ROMP to do it in ADMET. And the reason for that is because ADMET is so simple to synthesize monomers. So
Mm.
Ken Wagner at the University of Florida is really the big pioneer in this area. And I like to give him a shout out because he's done so much work in this area. But his group has shown over the years that you can take any type of monomers and just have a diene, right? It's so easy to do it from a synthetic standpoint. You just choose whatever functional group you like, an ester, a carbonate, sulfide, an ether, whatever you want, and just make sure you have a diene, one alkene at the end of each part of the molecule, and then you can polymerize that through ADMET. So that was really the driving force for us to adopt this polymerization.
Mm.
Is that it's just so easy to make different monomers and then different polymers. And again, keep in mind we had this idea of synthesizing a boatload of different polymers so that we can study how stereochemistry influence properties across many families of polymers. So that's what really drove us to this polymerization. And at the time, like all the ADMET always give you more trans double bond than cis double bond because of thermodynamically it's favorable in general to give trans double bond, and ADMET is what we call a thermodynamically controlled process.
Mm.
And so we were like, that was kind of challenging for us to say, can we implement some cis selectivity using the catalyst that we were using for ROMP into ADMET? And so ADMET is, if you want to think about it, it's not a chain growth process. It's what we call a step growth process because it's just a bunch of cross metathesis. So you're just doing cross metathesis, but instead of doing it one time, two times, you're doing n amount of time and trying to make as big of a polymer as you can. Now, that's going back to this idea that I talked about before. When you do cross metathesis and you want to try to do it like with a cis selectivity, if you only get 75% cis selectivity, that's fine because you can try to remove that, if you have 75 cis, you can try to remove that 25% trans. But if you're doing a polymers and then some of your double bonds just don't get the right configuration, then you're screwed.
Mm.
Like those are gonna stay there in your polymers. You can't remove them. So we really had to use those very elegantly designed catalysts by Veda and the coworker that really allow us to have extremely high cis selectivity in the ADMET process. And the other thing we had to do is tune a little bit the structure of the monomer. And we could not use terminal alkene, so we could not use those alpha omega diene. In our first paper, we had to just cap the chain end with a methyl group. And so that allowed us to not only have a catalyst that was not going to deactivate during the process, but that also allow us to get the cis selectivity because those catalysts we were using at the time are what we call retentive. So they keep whatever configuration you feed them with in the monomer. And so the monomers were cis because of the methyl group. And so then we could keep the cis in the polymer. And so that's how it worked. But one thing that we noticed, one thing we were aware of, I should say, is that means that we still had to spend a couple steps to make each monomer. And for polymer chemists, sometimes 2 steps is just 2 steps too many. Polymer chemists that are not synthetic chemists, like trained like my group, where we actually enjoy running columns and enjoy making multi-step synthesis. They would prefer just buying the monomers and just make polymers. That will be the actually interesting part of the project, is how to use those polymers. And so then we had to develop a new ADMET process that would actually allow us to do that with commercially available polymers. And so we just used a very different family of catalysts. And after optimization, my students were really tour de force, but they showed that you could get also very 99% cis selectivity. So that's
Interesting.
kind of our
On the
work in this
catalyst,
area.
on the catalyst, did you design the ligands, or your group design the ligands, or is this kind of something you were able to buy commercially, those catalysts?
Yeah, not great question. So not yet. So there's 2 families that we mostly focus on, and within the 2 family, we're using several different catalysts, but those were designed by all the groups. So I mentioned the Oveda group for one,
Yep.
and the Grubbs group, obviously, of metathesis fame, was the other group. So that I would say 2 of the most famous group for metathesis have been actually the one that really pushed forward those catalysts now about 10 years ago, and there was several iterations. So we now can make those in my group. When I started, we did not necessarily had the know-how in terms of catalyst synthesis. Those can be a bit tricky on some steps for people that are not trained with organometallic techniques. So it took us a little bit of time to develop those techniques. And so we really were fortunate that at the time, Umicore, which is now the company that owned Materia, that used to be Bob Grubbs' company, that will make those catalysts, actually made us very generous donation of a variety of those catalysts. So that's how we got started. And now we can use them. And now that means we can also change the scaffold of the catalyst for some application we have in mind. So now I think my group is going to really go into that direction. And that's why actually I'm trying to hire some postdoc that has experience in synthesizing catalyst, because we have a lot of projects where we think we can change the structure and for different reasons.
Yeah, if you're out there looking for a postdoc, you need to do some organometallics ligand design. Hit up Professor Michaudel. That's really cool. I think it is really fascinating that, like, how the effects of the catalyst and the ligands really dictate the selectivity that you get. And I was like looking back through your publications, and it seems like, the catalyst, but also the temperature. So the temperature also seems to have a role in really the trans and cis selectivity. And I'm sure these are active areas in research in your lab now, is really understanding how these things work. So that's really cool. I'm excited to see what comes out over the next few years. But I also want to touch on another area of your research, is in the sulfur 6, I think, fluoride exchange, and how this kind of came about. Like, what was the inspiration for this type of chemistry? Because I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, so this actually chemistry came from Scripps. Like the Sufex reaction is the latest type of click reaction developed by the Sharpless group, which is obviously a double Nobel Prize laureate.
Crazy.
In chemistry, and the latest one last year was about click reaction as well, with bioorthogonality, that he shared with Caroline Bertozzi and Maldal. And so I was aware of this type of reaction since my time as grad student, because I had good friends in the Sharpless group working on it, and I just found it very interesting. Maybe at the time, because I was so focused on the whole synthesis, it was nice to see someone doing polymer. I remember my friend James coming to give a talk in this retreat that we had for grad students, and he was showing samples of polymers, and at the time every reaction I would run was on less than 10 milligram scale, and it's often 1 or 2 milligram scale, and this guy was showing up with grams amount of material, and just polymers, and I was like, oh, that's so neat. And so I had been drawn to this for a long time, and then when I moved to do polymer with Brett, we didn't really we had no interest in Sufex at the time, but that was when I was thinking about project that I wanted to work on. Sufex came back, and I was like, this is a really interesting type of reaction that it's been pretty underexplored so far. And the reason what I was initially drawn to this type of polymerization is because it's allowing you to form polymers that have a SO2 group, so this sulfur 6 motif, and there's a variety of sulfur 6. Actually, the nomenclature of sulfur 6 is really quite complicated. But depending if you have nitrogen connected to the sulfur, or oxygen, or carbon, or one oxygen, one nitrogen, one oxygen, one carbon, etc., all those give different functional group. But they are actually very similar to the carbonyl, so the CO double bond functional group that we use in almost all plastics. So if you remove the polyolefins that are obviously extremely important type of polymers, a lot of plastic that you use every day, like the polyesters of your plastic bottle, the polycarbonates that are in your glasses or in your fish tank, and a lot of glass type application, the polyurethane that are in your mattress, in your car, in a lot of coatings, etc., they're all based on chemistry that rely on the CO double bond motif. And so my hypothesis when I started my group was can we remove that CO from the polymer chain and replace it by an SO2 using that suffix chemistry? And if we can do that based on some literature precedent, I made the hypothesis that we could make polymer that potentially would have similar physical property, maybe improved, I don't know, but more importantly, that would be able to make polymers that would be more easily recyclable. And so that really, I think, what drove me to this area, because right now, a lot of the plastic we make are pretty harsh to require pretty harsh condition, or are energy intensive in terms of recycling. And so in the US, and maybe that's me coming from Europe, where recycling is a bit more advanced compared to the US right now. But the US numbers are pretty tragic at the moment. We only recycle about 9% of plastics. And so how do we improve that numbers? And there's many strategies. And one of the strategies that my group is doing, but we haven't really published on yet, is to take existing plastic and try to find methods to either recycle or what we call upcycle. There's a lot of beautiful work done in this area where you take a plastic and you either bring it back to what you started with, or you transform it into another type of chemical entity that also will be useful, that you would add some value to that. And so that I think is something that has to be one of our main effort at the moment, because we are producing so much of this plastics. But another strategy maybe for later that we need to start already now is to design new families of polymers that will just be easier to recycle. And so obviously it will be difficult to disrupt the current industry with new polymers, because those processes that we have now to make plastic bags and plastic bottles are so efficient and inexpensive. But I think we need to start seeing ahead. And so that's kind of what we are using this suffix chemistry for. But the other thing that we like about suffix is that it's allow you to have motif, SO2 type motif that are actually extremely versatile in organic transformation. So we can take those to direct reaction. We can take those to transform them through radical process. And so my group just published a paper in STS Catalysis that I'm very proud of, because that's a paper that was a project we had that was really literally in my application, my startup, my job application packet. And it's something that I wanted to do for many, many years. And it took a long time for us to do it. But the idea was, can we use suffix, which is a click reaction? So for people not familiar with click reaction, those are reactions that work extremely well, give you very high yields of molecules that are, and very modular, so you can apply it to a lot of different molecules that have different atoms and different functional groups, and so on and so forth, and leave you to a product very easy to purify. So everybody likes to run click reaction. I mean, that's why it's been broadly adopted by not only the organic community, but the biochemistry, chemical biology community, by the polymer community. Like everyone making molecules is like to use click reaction. But what we thought would be nice would be, can we develop a click reaction that will have all those advantages, but that would lead to actually bonds that are actually more useful for organic molecules, or more ubiquitous in organic molecules, for example, a CC bond. Because a lot of time the click reaction would lead to kind of exotic linkers like triazole,
Yeah. Yeah.
or and so that's great if you don't really care about the nature of your linkers. But if you want to use it in photosynthesis, that's just not a reaction you can use. And so
Yeah.
now it's this idea of, can we take all the advantages of click reaction and combine them with reaction that will actually be useful for a variety of synthesis. And so that's what we just published. We shown we can take suffix, we can take a primary amines, we can functionalize it, we can form a diazine after the first step, and then we can expel the nitrogen. So we first expel SO2, then we expel nitrogen, and then we can recombine those radicals that we form to form new CC bond using nickel catalysis. And so that really was a dream of mine, showing that you can take, you can functionalize complex molecules. So ideally, I'm not saying this is going to be the new ways of doing all type of cross coupling, but the idea is that you can take complex molecules that have nitrogens, and there's a lot of those out there. You have obviously the peptides and proteins. You have the amino sugars. You have nucleotide type derivatives. So a lot of molecules have nitrogens, and you could potentially transform this nitrogen into a CC bond using that process. And so it took a lot of development, because not only we had to develop the click reaction and then the following oxidation step, but we also had to develop the catalysis. And then that's a combo of two catalysts, some iridium catalysis and nickel catalysis combined. So it took a lot of optimization and a lot of effort. So really, I want to really give a shout out to all the students and postdocs that have been involved in this project, because it was pretty heroic efforts in our group for a long time.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure it was a great optimization adventure. On the chemistry itself, though, a little bit, how like robust is it? So I mean, you could throw it. I assume you throw in your amine, you throw in the suffix reagent, you make the I guess sulfone. I don't even know what that functional group is called, but
so if you have two nitrogen, it's going to be called a sulfamide.
Sulfamide, okay. So you make the sulfamide. Hopefully you could do this in I imagine you can maybe do this all in like one pot. You throw in your suffix, let it react. You make the sulfamide, then you oxidize, you expel SO2, then you expel nitrogen, during the cross coupling catalysis. So is it possible to do this all within one pot, or do you have to kind of isolate each product?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So that would be a dream of ours. For now, I think the fact that we have to do stepwise is maybe we'll limit this adoption into a broader community, because it takes a few steps. Now, at the beginning, we really had to understand every intermediate that we formed, and every step, to make sure that even just the last step, there was like about 5-6 reagents used in that step. So just to figure the right ratio of everything, the right condition, the right solvent, the right temperature, it would have been impossible to just telescope, as we say, like all the steps right away. But that's what we are aiming to go toward. And we can already do part of it, so it's still a work in progress. But ideally, we would want to take an approach where we take the mean, and then you speed out the cross couple product. And so I think that's going to take some optimization in terms of having conditions that are tolerating each other, but also we can probably do some flow type chemistry to get this process to work in one step. We're also working on a different oxidation method. So there's a lot of way that we need to, and a lot of little steps that we need to work out before we can do it all in one pot or in 2 steps. And but that's definitely what we're trying to do.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. I'm excited to see then try and make this, I would say, more robust. On the chemistry itself, though, I'm not, let's say the sulfur imides that they don't really strike me as like a really reactive intermediate, but perhaps my perceptions are wrong. So how does it work to, when you oxidize the sulfamides to make the I guess it'd be a diazo compound, right? Is that a diazo? I think. How does that work?
It's like a diazine is like the general term for it. So it's great question. That's actually a reaction that has been known since the 60s. And it's called, the fancy name for it is an Aza-Rumber-Backlund. So Rumber-Backlund would be with the sulfon, and since we have sulfamide, it's going to be the Aza variation of it. And so the idea is that you can oxidize, so typically I would say you can chlorinate your nitrogen, and then all the nitrogen you can deprotonate, and then it will attack your nitrogen with the chlorine to form a 3-member ring. And so you have a 3-member ring that is quite funky because you have 2 nitrogen and 1 sulfur, and then that sulfur has SO2 groups on it. And so that obviously is quite strained and quite unhappy. So now you have water dirty typically coming in, and that will attack the sulfur and open up, and then you lose SO2 or some type of derivative of SO2, and you will form your double bond. So that's how this reaction works.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Okay. Yeah, I wouldn't have guessed like how, if I was like looking at that functional group, I just wouldn't have guessed how, like, what we can make from that. So it's pretty cool. You can make the dinitrogen complexes. But anyway, well, Professor, I want to thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. It was extremely excellent talking with you, and your chemistry is just, I mean, it's really, you have a lot of exciting work coming up in the future. It's going to be hard work, but like, it's super exciting for sure. I'm sure you're excited to see what comes out over the next few years. So yeah, thank you again.
Yeah, we are. I will thank you for having me. I really appreciate the invitation. I had a question for you. Are you a Dortmund fan?
So yeah, I am a Dortmund fan. I'm a Tottenham Hotspur. Tottenham Hotspur is my number 1 team, but I like to have different clubs throughout different leagues, and so Dortmund's up there. I also love AC Milan. So, but honestly, in general, I do follow a lot of football, though. I got to be completely honest. So, I will say Tottenham's my number 1, but I do follow like a lot of football. How about yourself? Do you watch football?
I watch a lot of football. I mean, I don't watch it as much as I used to because just even time difference makes the games not always at the right time for me to watch them. But yeah, I like to follow sports. I like to play soccer or football myself. So I have a team that plays typically on Sundays. I like to play tennis. So I really enjoy both playing and watching sports. So
yeah,
that's one of the, you mentioned early on some differences between the US and France. I would say football is probably one, both in both directions, right? What we call football and what American call football is a major source of differences between the two continents.
Especially here in Texas, it doesn't really make any, American football is huge here in Texas. I don't know why they call it football, but even here in Texas, when I say football, I mean soccer. So, and I'm gonna keep doing that here on the podcast. I don't even care. Anyone can come.
That's good. That's good. I appreciate it. But I also have learned to appreciate American football, and especially being in Texas, and especially being in the Texas A&M.
It's a huge football
religion
school
down here. So I've been to I watch Aggie games and it's,
you've been to a couple games like in person.
I've been to a couple games. Yeah.
They are.
I've even been to games against Alabama, so that was probably the biggest showdown that I've seen here at Cal Field.
It is it is American football does have its really good. I mean, the tailgate's super fun. Tailgates is super fun, and the games. I mean, honestly, a good American football match is really fun. The crowd really gets into it. I really like I do like the music and halftime shows, like the band. I really like that aspect of it, which you don't really get in proper football, which is nice. But
here the sport is really about entertainment.
Yeah, it's
not just the sport aspect. So that's also major as in defense. But
yeah.
But you should come up here and watch some games one day.
Absolutely.
Right from Houston.
I know. Actually, the reason one of the reasons I reached out to you is because and do you know? I mean, Unwin, Avia Martinez. She's I think she met you at a conference. I don't really remember how it all went down, but she's also
she was at A&M, so I met her.
Yeah. So. She's like, hey, you should look up this professor. I was like, all right, let's do it. So, but
cool.
Yeah, I've been meaning to get up to A&M. So
say hi to her for me.
Absolutely. Last thing is, do you follow any football teams? Then are you a supporter of any football clubs, or you just kind of like watching the greater football in general?
I do. I'm like you. I follow depending on the league that I follow. I enjoy different teams. So in France,
don't say
my
PSG.
favorite team.
Don't say PSG.
I hate PSG. I hate that team. And I was actually, hoping that Dortmund would win this week.
I know they're really bad. They look bad right now, honestly, Dortmund. But it's all right.
But no, I would say like Monaco is my favorite team for no reason
Monaco.
whatsoever. I have no roots there. It's probably the furthest team away from where I grew up. But when I grew up, and La Rochelle doesn't have a professional football team.
Yeah, I
so
was
I
looking
could
to see if they
not.
had any clubs, but there really is any.
No, so the closest are Bordeaux and Nantes, but like all my friends were already picking up those teams, and I was like, I want to be different, so I was just picking
Yeah,
up. And the choice you make when you're like 6 or 7 years old
it
has to
sticks
be
with
true
you.
the rest of your life. So that's why I chose. But I would say that we have a very good rugby team, and I really like watching rugby. And
Mm,
so my hometown is one of the best team right now in the country. So that's been fun for a smaller size town that we have.
yeah.
And then otherwise, Premier League would probably be Arsenal because at some point when I was growing up, there was a
God,
lot of there was an amazing team with a lot of French players and a French coach. So
yeah,
I like Arsenal, and so that's against your
I
your
know,
Tottenham.
but they're
But
they do play
Spurs.
the North London Derby is tomorrow morning. I will definitely be watching that. That should be an exciting match. I'm surprised though that rugby is not as popular here in America. I mean, it definitely is like it definitely. I mean, college rugby is definitely like pretty popular, but I'm surprised it's not as popular like as in Europe. I'm not really sure why that is, honestly. If people like American football
I
so
think
much,
it's
I'm
maybe
not
because
really.
it's just a bit. I think it's a bit too similar to football. I mean, it's very different,
Maybe.
but it is, in spirit, I would say the two sports are actually much more similar than football is to soccer.
Mm,
And so I think that maybe why it's hard to adopt this sport that it kind of resemble the national sport. But right now the World Cup is happening in France, so it's a really big deal for us. And so I encourage everyone to try to watch a game if they have a chance. So.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, rugby is a very exciting sport. I've seen a few college ones in my days. But Professor, thank you so much for Quentin. I'll say Quentin. Thank you again for coming on the podcast today, and thank you for another
No
episode. And
problem,
we'll see you
Aiden.
next time.
It was great.